Yeah. Okay, I can start. So everyone, it's time to get started. So this is the final lunch talk of the spring semester, and I am very happy to see you all here. So it's a great delight for me to welcome Florian Neitmann to the CASR lunch talks. Florian has just submitted his PhD to the University of Minster and is currently a visiting fellow here at CAMA. And today he will present the paper More or Less Biblical Readings, Early Jewish Text in a Syriac Lectionary Manuscript from India. And you know the drill, 30 minutes for Florian and 30 minutes for us for discussion and for questions and answers. And then there's a mic over here and we have to use it. We didn't do it last time, so we have to do it. And then there's a chat function too.
So thank you very much both for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak here, which is very delighting. The reason why I'm here in Oslo is that I'm interested in two fringy texts commonly called 2nd Baruch and 4th Ezra. In fact, these texts are so fringy that they exert a kind of centripetal force on all those who study it in depth to flock together in order to reassure each other that these texts are in fact the most interesting thing, quite not they consider fringy. Thus, though the member of this fringy community with the utmost satisfaction to discover traces of communities in the past for whom those texts were not that fringy either. Some of those traces are found in the manuscript I would like to present to you today. In this talk, I'm going to dwell on two major points. First, how do we see in the manuscript whether the text is considered biblical or fringy apocryphal? Second, if a text that is otherwise considered fringy does figure as a biblical text, how does it interact with other biblical texts? Before we get to these points, let me first give you an introduction into the story of the manuscript and its biography. The manuscript is a lectionary, which is a book containing the Bible readings for church service. It was produced in the 1420s. Concerning the place, I have to confess that the subtitle of my presentation was in fact misleading. The manuscript is not from India originally, but from the city of Homs in Syria. I just thought it sounded a bit more interesting to say it's a Syriac manuscript from India than a Syriac manuscript from Syria. It's not the latter. From the 1460s until the 17th century, it was kept in Jerusalem, as noted in several colophons written in Arabic and Garshuni, that is, Arabic written in Syriac letters. And at this point, I would pay a very warm thanks to Mina Monnier, who greatly helped me deciphering those Arabic colophons. Another language, though, that is found in the manuscript is Malayalam, which testifies to the place where the manuscript is kept today, namely in the Konark collection in Kerala, India. Thus, the manuscript reflects the globalized world of Syrian Christianity, which by that time had already been enrooted in India for more than 1,000 years. To sum up the introductory matters, the manuscript has undergone major changes throughout its lifetime. The same is true of liturgical orders and biblical canons reflected in it, which takes us to the next point. As stated in the beginning, the peculiarity of this manuscript is that it contains readings from the writings that in Western scholarship are commonly called 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch. There are only 4 other Syriac lectionaries that contain passages from these books. However, among the communities that produced these lectionaries and celebrated the liturgy according to them, these texts were considered biblical. Regarding the present manuscript, there is a feature that strikingly points to the changing nature of biblical canons. At the margins of the book, a later scribe has added the chapter and verse ranges of the passages found in the main text. However, in the case of some books, these references are lacking. More precisely, this is the case with 4th Ezra, 2nd Baruch, Wisdom of Solomon, and then Syriac. This shows that the scribe who added the chapter and verse references in the margin used the Bible edition that did not contain these writings. For 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch, this is not a great surprise, as their transmission in Syriac Bibles is confined to one single Bible manuscript, and they are not part of most modern printed editions either. The case is different, however, with Ben Sira and the Wisdom of Solomon. They are part of many biblical manuscripts and several liturgical orders, with varying choices of passages and occasions. In the case of Wisdom of Solomon, there is one feature in the present lectionary that betrays that it was a firmly established part of the Bible in the eyes of the scribe who produced it. In two cases, a reading from the book of Proverbs is falsely attributed to Wisdom of Solomon. Apparently, the scribe did not look up the origin of every reading he found in the liturgical order that he would produce, but at least in some cases resorted to guesswork. The fact that a passage from the book of Proverbs could be falsely ascribed to the Wisdom of Solomon shows that both books were regarded as equally canonical. However, as we know, there are some obscure latter-day deviations of Christianity in Central and Northern Europe, for whom Wisdom of Solomon and Ben Sira are not Hebrew enough to be biblical in the proper sense, and who therefore keep both of those noble writings out of their standard Bibles. This fringy group is also known as the Protestants. As this tradition somehow managed to infiltrate large parts of the world, it also seems to have left its traces in our manuscripts. The place where this becomes visible are the chapter and verse ranges noted above. Remarkably, they are based on the enumeration system established in Western Europe, not on the completely different system developed in Syriac Christianity. In Syriac Bibles, the Western system spread only with the dissemination of printed Bible editions. Now, in the present manuscripts, these chapter and verse notes are lacking in the passages from those books that are not part of the Hebrew and Protestant canon. All of those elements strongly suggest that the scribe who added the chapter and verse ranges used one of the editions of the Syriac Bible that were promoted by the British and Foreign Bible Society in the 19th century. Thus, those notes reflect the influence of the British colonial power. However, they also reflect its limits. The lack of chapter and verse references does not mean that the texts were not read anymore. It just shows that the later scribe used the Bible edition based on a narrower definition of the canon than the Bible used by those who originally copied the manuscript. So far, I have only dealt with the question whether or with the fact that these more or less biblical books are read. In the following second part, let us turn to the question of how they are read. In other words, what significance can these texts carry in their liturgical context? To approach this question, they must be viewed in the context of the occasion in which they are recited and of the other biblical texts that are potentially read on the same occasion. I will call this approach liturgical intertextuality. According to the present lectionary, there are 3 occasions on which passages from 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch can be read. The most prominent occasion in the liturgical calendar is Easter Sunday, which has already been studied by the person sitting next to me in her book, Invisible Manuscripts. In today's presentation, I shall limit myself to one other example, the Sunday of the Deceased, for which the reading order, according to the present manuscript, contains both a pericope from Ezra and from Baruch. In the Syrian tradition, the Sunday of the Deceased is the main occasion for commemorating the dead, like All Saints' Day in many other countries. As reflected by the readings, the day has an ambivalent character. On the one hand, it expresses the hope for resurrection in eternal life. On the other hand, it envisages the final judgment, threatening the listeners with eternal punishment if they are found to be sinners. Both aspects are also encapsulated in the writings from Ezra and Baruch. Let me summarize these 2 passages first, and then the other ones. The passage referenced as from Ezra the scribe has a prediction of eschatological events. The city of Zion will appear, God's Messiah will be revealed, and will give pleasure, or literally a sweet fragrance, to those who are with him. However, after 30 years he will die, along with all living beings, and the world will fall back into primeval silence. After 7 days, the world will be roused again, everything corruptible will be ended, and all the dead will be raised from their graves. A special emphasis is laid on the final judgment, which is strictly uncompromising, as it leads to a state in which truth is brought to light. At the end, everything that remains is the sheer splendor of divine glory. The following pericope is introduced as from Baruch the scribe. In a similar way to the passage from Ezra, it is predicted that everything corruptible will perish. In the ensuing proclamation of the final judgment, there is an even stronger emphasis on its dichotomous nature. The wise who have acquired for themselves treasures of wisdom and have been faithful to the law are given a place in the world to come. In contrast, the place reserved for the many others is eternal fire. This threatening image is where the reading ends. Both aspects, the defeat of death and the threat of the final judgment, recur in the other readings. The first lection is from Ezekiel 37, the vision of a field of dry bones that are brought to life by the divine word and spirit. The subsequent reading is from Isaiah 38, the prayer of Hezekiah about his disease, which made him face death, and about his wondrous deliverance. This ties in with the predictions in the reading from Ezra and from Baruch on the consumption of the corruptible and mortal. This again is resumed in the reading from the Pauline epistles, which is from the passage on the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15. Since Christ is risen, death will eventually be destroyed, and God will be all in all. This final statement relates with the one at the end of the reading from Ezra, envisioning that the only thing remaining after all will be the splendor of divine glory. The preceding lection, however, which is from the letter of James, chapter 45, resumes the theme of judgment. It urges the sinners to cleanse their hearts, warns from being overconfident about one's future plans, and ends an ardent chastisement of the rich for amassing treasures in the last days. This contrasts the portrayal of the righteous in the reading from Baruch as those who have acquired for themselves treasures of wisdom. The same imagery returns in the gospel text that was probably recited on the day of the decease, which is from Luke 12. Here Jesus urges his disciples, "Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail." With a reference to the treasure in heaven and the urge to sell one's possessions, the gospel text bridges between the lection from Baruch and the one from the letter of James. In the following, Jesus calls his disciples to vigilantly wait for their master, promising that those who will do so will be served by their master while reclining at a table. This again resonates with the reading from Ezra, where the Messiah is envisioned to give pleasure to those who are with him. Finally, it is important to note that the revelation of John is not part of most Bible canons in the Syrian tradition, and accordingly it is not read in the liturgy. This gives even greater weight to the eschatological passages from 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch. Thus, for Syrian Christians who used to celebrate the liturgical year according to this reading order, the passages might have been among the key texts for the imagination of the final judgment and the role of the Messiah at the end of days. With this exercise in liturgical intertextuality, I hope to have given you some insights on the significance that the passages from 4th Ezra and 2nd Baruch could have carried in the liturgical context in which they have been embedded. Due to their sparse reception, they do not commonly form part of the Bible, which earned them their fringy reputation as apocrypha or pseudepigrapha. However, for some communities, they were firmly integrated in the network of biblical text that shapes the message of a liturgy. Both in the case of liturgical orders and scriptural accounts, their malleable nature makes research often more complex, as it constantly urges to question the verisimilitude and scope of one's results. However, this is also what makes the study of manuscripts all the more interesting, at least for me. Thank you very much.